Chapter 27, The Conclusion of Streams to the River, River to the Sea, a novel of Sacagawea, written by Scott Odell. Captain Lewis fired a cannon at the first sight of the Minataries, and all the people ran down to the river. Black Moccasin came to welcome us, but he looked sad as he embraced me. Red Hawk had been killed not long before by Blackfeet. To mourn his son, he had cut off one of his fingers, as was the custom of the Minataries and the Shoshone. Charbonneau's wife, Otterwoman, came down to the shore. She was carrying a baby in a cradle board. Charbonneau looked at the baby and seemed pleased until he saw that it was a girl. Then he hunched his shoulders and turned away. Captain Lewis fired his cannon 3 times more. He and Captain Clark smoked a peace pipe with the chieftains and invited them to go with them and meet the Great White Father. The chieftains said that they would like to go, but were afraid of the Sioux. The Sioux were camped on the river now, not far below, waiting to kill them. We camped across the river from the village and had many visitors the rest of the day. Laborn himself came to visit us. He left his canoe and stood on the shore. Casting his eye about, he looked as tall as a tree. It had been raining a little, but now it was steaming hot. Laborn wore a heavy buffalo robe and a towering headdress of foxtails and feathers, and around his neck a double circlet of bear claws. Ben York said, "The chief's dressed for winter. Maybe this means we'll get a wintry welcome." Charbonneau said, "One-eyed show-off mean nothing. All-time big, ugly show-off dress-up chief. My advice to you is to keep your thoughts to yourself." Captain Clark said, "We deal with a dangerous man. At the end of our journey, I don't wish to be scalped." "Not the end," York said. "We still have some long miles to go. We're not in St. Louis yet." For me, it might be the end. My heart sank at the thought, yet I clung to the hope that Captain Clark would take me with him. He knew that I loved him. He knew that I hated Charbonneau. After supper that night, he gave Charbonneau the money that President Jefferson owed him. It was a piece of paper worth $500. Captain Clark said. Charbonneau put the paper in his jacket and went off to play the hand game with Laborn. Otterwoman left her baby with me and trailed after him. They had not been gone long before Captain Clark came to the tent. He took Miko out of the cradle board and sat down and held him on his lap. We were outside by the fire. For a while he played with the baby. He spoke only to him and not to me, but I felt that he was thinking about me. I was sure that he had something he wanted to say before Charbonneau came back. I waited. The night was full of sounds. Wild birds were calling to each other. The trees and the sky were filled with their cries. Sounds came from the river that Captain Clark and I had traveled together. I waited. After some time, he put Miko back in the cradle board and came out and sat beside me on the ground. The fire was dying, but live embers cast light on his face. "Pomp has grown fast," he said. "How old is he? 18 months, at least?" 19. "He'll soon be ready to learn. I would like to take him back to St. Louis and put him in school. I talked to Charbonneau this evening, and he thought that it would be a good thing for the boy." I was disturbed. "The boy is still a baby," I said. But he's not too young to start learning American words. I've taught him 3 words already. Yes, no, and Papa. He takes after you. He learns fast. Remember how you learned to count from 1 to 20 in only 1 day? I remember. I remembered many things. All the days and weeks and months, all the things we had done together. "You could go to school too," Captain Clark said. "To a young ladies' school. There's a fine one for young ladies in St. Louis. Some good ones in Washington, where President Jefferson lives." "What would I learn in school?" "To do needlework." "I can do needlework now. I have sewn you 3 jackets and 5 shirts and—" "I mean fine needlework, like pillows and spreads, sheets and nice underclothes for yourself." "I would learn something else?" "Oh, yes. You learn to write, to use all the words that now you can only speak." "Other things too?" "Many. You can jump from a canoe to the shore in 1 leap. You can climb a cliff You can run down a deer, though I have never seen you do it, but you haven't learned to dance. Not yet. Is dancing important where you are going? Important. American girls love to dance. They dress up in their fancy clothes and dance and dance and dance. All night sometimes. Sometimes until the sun comes up? Often. If I learn to sew nice things and write words and dress up and dance all night when I go to this ladies' school, then I would be a lady myself? The embers had turned to ashes, but a fire was burning in front of the lodge where Charbonneau and Leborgne were playing the hand game. The fire lit up the sky and cast flickering lights on Captain Clark's face. He was puzzled. Then I would be what you call a lady, I said. He did not answer. Would you like that? I asked him. He stared into the ashes. He was uncomfortable. You wish me to go to school and become a lady? Not at all. I like you the way you are, Janie. It was the sound of the words, not what the words said, that made me suddenly remember what Ben York had told me. If, he had said, if a white man marries you, he will be called a squaw man, and people will look down on him. I had never forgotten his words. I remember them now. A gray mist was drifting up from the river. Captain Clark made another fire, using a fuse like the one he had used on the Columbia River with the Nierchokios. It sputtered and burst into flame. A bitter smell of powder rose around us. About the boy, he said. Of course, you would come along too. He'll need you. What fun you'll have together, and how much he'll learn. You'll be proud of him. I am proud of him now. Captain Clark hesitated. And how much you'll learn also. I am much too old to go to school. You're still a child. A child? Is that the way he thought of me? All this last year, all these days and weeks and months we had been together, he had thought of me as a child. A beautiful Indian child, he said. I am an Indian woman, Captain Clark, an Indian woman who has a child 19 months old. He shrugged at my sharp tone and put a stick of wood on the fire. I was quiet. He talked about St. Louis and Washington, where Thomas Jefferson lived, and how after I was through with school, I would meet the great white chieftain who ruled America. I listened with one ear. In the midst of all the talking, screams burst out in the lodge. Charbonneau, an otter woman, came back to the tent. She was blaming him for losing all his money to Leborgne, the $500 Captain Clark had given him, and he blamed her for trying to tell him how he should have handled the plum pits. They kept on fighting after Captain Clark left, so I took Miko and went down to the river and crawled into one of the canoes. I did not sleep. I thought about Captain Clark. I thought about how he wanted me to go to school and learn things and become a lady. I thought about when Ben York had told me. I remembered his warning. I saw it written across the sky. Also, I thought about Miko. Captain Clark would take him to a big place somewhere. He would send him to school and teach him things. Miko would learn to talk like a white boy. He would grow up and have a lot of hair on his face. He would look like a white man and try to act like a white man. But he never would be a white man. He was a Shoshone. I would teach Miko myself. He would learn to run beside a stream all day from dawn until the sunset and never stop once to take a drink. He would learn to put his hand in boiling water and say that it was cold. He would be a Shoshone always. In the morning, Captain Lewis talked to Leborgne. He told him that if he kept the peace, he would be rewarded by the great white chief in Washington. And as a proof of his friendship, Captain Lewis gave him his valuable air gun, which pleased Leborgne so much that he said he would think about keeping the peace. Captain Lewis gave me a wonderful present, too. It happened that night while I was at the river getting water to cook with. Sacagawea, he said. He never called me Janie. You've taken good care of Scannon. You've found food for him when food was scarce. You even saved his life. He thinks much more of you than he does of me. If you want him, young lady, he is yours. I want him. I want him, Captain Lewis. Can I have him now? Now. Scannon, thinking of food, followed me to the lodge. Charbonneau was sitting against the tree while Otter Woman stood over him and combed his beard. "What's dog for?" he asked. Captain Lewis gave him to me. "Shoshone woman, maybe I give you something too. With large stick on head, huh? That dog eats all the time." Otter Woman turned and eyed Scannon. "He is plump one. Maybe it's better to keep him for a pot." "Maybe good idea, Otter Woman." I slept in the canoe that night with Scannon. Before dawn, I put Miko on my back and went to the longhouse. I took a sack of pemmican, five cakes of blackberry bread, and some elk fat. When the herdsman drove the horses down to the river, I followed him. I had to wait a while until he had eaten and was asleep. Then I took a horse and rode out of the village with Scannon at my heels. As I rode, I saw the canoes were loaded and ready to leave. I caught a glimpse of Captain Clark. He stood on the shore. His red hair shone in the sun. I had not trusted myself to say farewell to him. Now it was too late. I crossed my wrists and put them over my heart and pressed them together, one on the other. It was a sign of love. The shortest trail to my people led toward the setting sun. It was shorter, 3 times shorter, than the way up the Missouri River and the Yellowstone. It was the quick trail the raiders had taken the time they captured Running Deer and me, the same trail Running Deer had taken when she left and went home. There was a half moon. I rode hard along the river until the moon set and my guiding star shone through the trees. Scannon ran beside me. In the morning, we were on the trail at sunrise. The sky was deep blue and cloudless. Locusts sang in the high grass. The wild blooms of summer were everywhere. I picked a handful for Miko. He laughed and smelled them. One day, when he was older, I would tell him that the wild blooms were the footprints of little children, those who had gone away and had come back to gladden us. I would tell him many things that the Shoshone people knew. The end.